my work there was to help as much as I could my friends and other Marines in the infantry. And that was our real job. You know, we kept the airplanes safe, we kept the helicopters safe, we got close air support missions to them as fast as we could. But it was all to make their life a little easier, which was hard to do. You know, the medevacs and that sort of stuff. It just, you know, we were, you know, we tried to make sure that just like the guys in the artillery would do, they try to make the rifleman's, the rifle platoon leader's life a little easier, and keep down the casualties on our side, and maximize those on the other side. As an air support control officer, they wanted you qualified in two distinct jobs. The one was as the senior air director in the Direct Air Support Center, nicknamed the DASC, and the other was as a strike controller in the air support radar team, commonly known as the ASRAT. And I got qualified I was qualified in my MOS from my 6 months at Cherry Point after basic school at Quantico. But then once you got into Vietnam, you had to get sort of requalified because you were be involved in dropping real bombs and taking care of real emergencies in the Direct Air Support Center. So I had to get sort of requalified as a senior air director and requalified as a strike controller. So I worked in both agencies while I was in Chu Lai.
So what did when you're in the Direct Air Control Center, the DASC, then what are you doing? What sort of tasks do you have in that role?
Well, we acted as the interface between the division and the air wing. So if they needed an airstrike somewhere, we would be the ones going to the wing to have the airplanes launched to support, and we would give them the information on who they needed to contact once they got over the infantry that had requested the support. We also had launch authority for any medevac, any emergency medevac. So we could divert any helicopter to go pick up an emergency. It was a Marine emergency medevac. And in fact, one time the guys diverted the general's helicopter to go pick up an emergency medevac. Wow. And then our next big deal was something we called save-a-planes, which was keeping track of artillery and naval gunfire missions so that we didn't direct, especially helicopters, through those firing lanes.
Right. Sure.
That was a big deal. So aircraft safety and then coordination between the division and the wing were the two big deals that we had in the Direct Air Support Center.
So I'm hearing three things. So then a call comes in from the Marines in the field. We need air support. You send the air support. Second would be we need medevac. And
if it's we would take care of that. And you know, over between medevac, we would contact the helicopter people, and they would, you know, if they had somebody in the area where if it wasn't a hot zone means the description I got from a helicopter pilot was that everyone in the zone is flat on their face. Mm-hmm. And so they would need a gunship to go in with them to get that wounded Marine out.
And would you be part of arranging that as well, or
yes?
So we need to send in the medevac with gunships.
Yeah, we would let them know. You know, we got emergency medevac in a hot zone, and the helicopter people would know what to do in that case. And sometimes we might even try to get fixed wing in there to really suppress the fire that they were receiving.
And then the other thing I'm hearing is another thing you need to track is if we have fire support missions coming in from naval vessels, we just need to know where those shells are in the sky to make sure our helos are not in that area.
Yeah, and we would get that information. We would plot it on our board so we could see exactly where it was, and we would get that information from the division's Fire Support Coordination Center. So
Yeah.
we were usually right next to them. In fact, Khe Sanh was the only case where we were not right next to them.
So then you had this job, air support radar team. What did that involve?
That involved mainly controlling bombing missions at night. Because that way, in other words, most close air support during the day, the planes would come down pretty low and release their ordnance, depending on how close they were to friendlies. The stuff we did at night would be we would respond to a target list that was provided by the Fire Support Coordination Center, and we would get the planes to come up with whatever bomb load they had, and we would start going down that target list as much as we could, and usually it was the sort of harassment and interdiction type missions that we would fly, and because it was at night, the planes were flying straight and level at about 15,000 feet, and our fire control radar would track them. And we had an analog computer where we put in the coordinates of the target. And then I and other strike controllers would control the airplane to the appropriate drop point and tell him when to release his bombs. I was involved with B-52 strikes when I was the officer in charge of the Khe Sanh Director Support Center. We would get them as an aircraft safety message, and we would get a message that where we had to go to a secret document to translate the coordinates of the target that they were going to hit, and we would of course put that up because helicopter pilots weren't too keen about flying under a B-52 strike.
Right.
So we would have those. Now I never encountered those either at Chu Lai or at Da Nang, only at Khe Sanh, and they would become up fairly regularly, and
Wow.
it was a rather large target that they hit,
Right.
and it was maybe anyway it felt like an earthquake in the DASC when they were dropping.
Wow.
I mean, just like an earthquake in Southern California. And they were about a mile from us.
Wow. As the officer, are you primarily in a supervisory role? Are the enlisted guys doing most of the actual communicating, and you're sort of just keeping track of what's going on and providing general supervision?
Yeah, they in the Direct Air Support Center, the enlisted folks would be keeping track of the things that we kept up on our status board, and then the senior air director would be the one communicating with the division or the wing in terms of getting close air support or helicopter support or medevac support, and there would sometimes be a couple of officers and maybe 3 or 4 enlisted men working in the Director Support Center. At Khe Sanh, we would the Director Support Center there would be just the one officer and a couple of enlisted men because we were a pretty small group.
When did you get into Khe Sanh?
It was the end of February '68. I was sent up there to relieve the we started relieving the people that had initially gone in there in January to get them out of there, and so we had a new crew coming in to get them out of there, and I took over as a friend of mine was the OIC of the desk, and I took over the desk from him, and had that till the first air cav had moved through Khe Sanh on their way west. So
And is that about April or something like that?
yeah, that was early April, like the first week of April. So I was there about 6 weeks.
You said you needed to get that team out of Khe Sanh. I'm assuming what's underlying that statement is after just the intensity of the continuous bombardment, these guys were pretty exhausted, I'm guessing, and
Yeah,
at some
and we,
point you lose your effectiveness.
yeah, and that they just wanted to get these guys a break. We didn't, if we have people that can go in there and pick things up from them, uh, get them out of there so they don't have to go through that anymore. And then it'll be our turn, kind
So
of.
when we're talking about Khe Sanh and you say go through that, what do you mean by that?
Well, it was just an intense uh, operations all the time. I mean, it was unlike anything I had seen working in the DASC at Chu Lai or at Da Nang. I mean, it was the pace was, the air support there was tremendous. So we had to be on that all the time, and flights would show up, and we would have sometimes we'd have to figure out where to send them. One day we had I forget how many of it was, but a huge flight of aircraft off the carriers reported into us. They couldn't, because of weather, they couldn't get into their targets in North Vietnam. So they sent them down to us, and I just had to figure out a target to send them to. And it was, like there were like 25 airplanes on one air support radar team drop. We called it a mini arc light, which was the 52s were arc lights.
Yeah.
So, so we were able to do that because they only had time for one run, and we had a different mix of bombs, which is a problem with the air support radar team because of the ballistics. So we had to send them to a target that wasn't too close to the infantry, so they could get rid of their bombs and not have to go back on the boat with their bombs or drop them in the South China Sea. And and it was that sort of thing was that we didn't see in places further south.
Now you're carrying these, you're organizing these complicated missions, and I'm assuming you're getting information from intelligence. Where are the NVA to,
Right.
and all of this, you're doing all of this while you've got incoming, I imagine, fairly regularly, right? The incoming artillery from the NVA.
Well, it was most of that would be at night, because they were obviously smart enough to know that if we spotted them during the day, there would be an A6 down their throat in a minute.
Right, yeah.
So a lot of it was at night, although we would get the occasional mortar round or so during the day. In fact, our bunker got hit with a mortar round one day.
What were your first impressions when you get into Khe Sanh? Obviously, by the time you get there, you've heard a lot about it.
Yeah.
What are the first images that come to your mind when you remember getting into Khe Sanh for the first time?
Well, funny thing is, when I got the word at Chu Lai or at Da Nang that I was supposed to go up there, I got a helicopter ride to Dong Ha. And then I got on another helicopter that was going into Khe Sanh, a CH-46. And as I recall, I was the only passenger on that thing. So when he let down, I got off the helicopter as quickly as I could, because hanging around the airstrip would attract fire from them during the day. And one of the first things I noticed was an A6 at the south end of the runway conducting a bombing mission. I mean, it was that close to where we were. Then I hustled a friend of mine who was the officer in charge of the air support radar team there at the time, met me and took me over to the direct air support center. But everything was flat. I mean, there were no upstanding buildings, and everybody was in a bunker at that point. And
just hunkered down.
Yeah, yeah,
Veterans who are at Khe Sanh often will talk about the rats. Does that
yes.
stick in your memory as well?
Yeah, yeah. We had in fact we set traps for them, and I remember we got one in our bunker, and it was a big fella. I mean, I've never seen one that big since, and so I just and you could smell it, and it was right near where I was sleeping, and I was on the top bunk, thankfully, but but
Mm.
I just took my entrenching tool, the trap and the rat, the whole thing, and just dumped it on the burn pit that we had going for garbage and things, and
Wow.
but
Uh,
yeah, I couldn't believe how big it was.
so you were in Khe Sanh late February to early April.
Hmm.
And how would you describe the progression of events in Khe Sanh? Um, I mean, I'm guessing things lifted over time, things became less intense over time, or did they not?
Yeah, I would say so from what I gathered from talking to the guys that were up there first, and but we did have a couple of I know one night we had some heavy shelling, and uh, it didn't seem to be in the particular area where our bunker was. But one of the lieutenants who had been on watch at that time said that he almost came in to wake us up because it was pretty intense. But it didn't get to be that bad. But they did have a case where the a round hit the one of the rifle company bunkers and killed their company commander. And so we still had some of that stuff going on. We still had some incidences where they would. I know that after First Battalion, 9th Marines went down and took over a hill just south of the base that they had occupied. Um, they tried to launch a counterattack that night, uh, and the Marines had heard some noise in front of their positions. So fortunately, I had a flare ship above us at the base. So I told we got the hold of the flare ship, had them contact 19, and he started popping flares and caught those guys in the open.
The NBA.
Yeah, and they were done for. They shot down a airplane that was bringing in reinforcements to Khe Sanh, and they got that plane as it was on the approach to the airstrip at Khe Sanh and killed everybody on board, including a civilian reporter.
Wow. Were
And
you were you were you at Khe Sanh when that happened?
yes, in fact, I was senior air director in the DASC when we got that report. But there was nothing we could do about it, and I'm not sure what happened after that in terms of taking care of things. But apparently, the NVA had some quad 50 calibers anti-aircraft guns dug in somewhere south of the base, and which was the approach to the runway, and hit that target.
When that sort of thing happens, or when that particular thing happens, what is the response at the moment? Because obviously you have to carry on with your own job,
Mm-hmm.
but a number of other Marines, and then you said the civilian reporter were just killed. In that moment, you hear the news, you get the news, maybe have some brief personal response to it, but you get back to work, or what
Yeah,
do you
yeah,
do? Do you just hear
yeah.
it and let it go?
Well, you kind of have to get back to work because so many other things are going on.
Mm.
I think I probably contacted the uh, Tactical Air Command Center in Da Nang to let them know. It was an Air Force aircraft, but not a Marine aircraft, but there were Marines on it coming in as replacements. So and tactical air command center is kind of belongs to the commanding general of the wing, so I'm sure he would want to know. And so I'm pretty sure I let them know what was going on, and then other things would start happening again.
Back to work.
Yeah.
When the Tet Offensive begins at the end of January '68, are you in Da Nang at that point?
Right. Yeah, I was officer in charge of an air support radar team at that point, and we were on a ridge line up above the First Marine Division headquarters, and there was a road running down that ridge line, and so we had the huts that we lived in were also up there, so we could walk down to where our equipment was. And then on the other side of the road was directly opposite us was a hut with some division communications people in it. So that night, we always had a fire watch at night, and I heard the kids yelling, "Incoming, incoming." And so, of course, that would wake you up, and it wasn't incoming. It was a VC sapper team, engineers blowing up trucks on that road.
Wow.
It was about 50 yards from where I was sleeping.
Wow.
And they had killed a couple of Marines. One of them had escaped and come down to us, and he was pretty well shaken up. But for some reason they never came towards us.
The VC.
They blew up their trucks and killed anybody they could in the immediate area and left. And but I mean they could if it had been a Marine unit, they probably would have kept on coming, but they didn't. I mean, that of course that's kind of the way we heard that they worked. That you had one thing to do and don't use your initiative. And so they blew up a couple of trucks that didn't belong to us; they belonged to the communications people, and left. And they were there for a few minutes, and we were trying to figure out what was going on, and then but they never came down, and they could have come right down the road and blown up our air support radar team equipment. I had people in there because we would get strike information at night, but they never bothered that. Our bombing missions increased considerably over what they were pre-tech. As I said earlier, we had stuff during the day that we were doing, and one time we were given a target. Normally our targets would be like 100 square meters. And this time we were given a whole grid square, which was 1,000 square meters.
Wow.
And they said they suspected that there was an NVA brigade in there that was headed for Da Nang. And so we took A6s who could carry a lot of bombs and just crisscrossed that grid square with 3 or 4 of them, and they were able to space their bombing so that they could hit the grid square in an even pattern as they crossed, all 32 bombs. And that brigade never showed up at Da Nang. So I don't know if they sent recon people in there to see if there were a lot of dead NVA lying around or not. I never heard that. We never heard much about the targets we bombed.
It sounds like the intensity ramps up considerably during TET.
Yeah, it did. It did. I mean, we had a lot more missions to conduct, even in the daytime than we had under what would pass for normal conditions there. The only time I knew exactly what happened with an air support radar team bombing was one that I conducted. It was daytime, and we got a call from an AO that he wanted some close air support. And so daytime makes it pretty easy to figure out what's going on most of the time. And so he gave us the coordinates of the target, which he recognized as a VC bunker, and I got a direct hit on it. So, and he said, he said it just as 2 VC were starting to run into it. But that's the only time I know that any of the bombing missions that I conducted, we got any feedback. Christmas of '67 at Da Nang, and I was in the Director Support Center at that time, and that was supposed to be a ceasefire, and nobody was supposed to move. But it's always good to check. So we had air observers up flying around to check on the NVA, and this one guy spotted this NVA battalion moving up the road, and they weren't supposed to be doing that. So we started feeding him A4s and F4s as quickly as we could get them, and then about a day or two later, he came into the DASC and thanked us for all the help we had given him. And I was always confused about Tet in terms of the reaction it got in the States, because to me it was pretty much like what the Germans did in December of 1944 with the bulge. Now, as I recall from reading World War II history, people didn't sort of throw up their hands and say, we've lost the war and the Germans won. And they didn't say, well, we ought to fire Eisenhower. Maybe they should have and replaced him with Patton, but that wasn't in the cards. And we had the same thing. And to me, Tet was very similar to that. A desperate attempt by the enemy to take control, and they didn't get their uprising that they hoped for. And their South Vietnamese allies were essentially an ineffective military force after that. But everybody thought it was a defeat for the U.S.
Was that something that you sensed at the time? And I've heard this from a number of vets who were there during Tet, and they say, we thought the war was going to be over pretty soon, because they surprised us with Tet, but we turned around and hammered them. Right. And we thought the war was going to wrap up. But then there's this feeling like back in the States, a story developed that, Tet was somehow a defeat of some kind. And veterans talk about how they're over in South Vietnam feeling puzzled by this, because they feel like the response to Tet was a great success, but the feeling they're getting from the States is that it wasn't. And so there's this confusing thing. Do you recall having that sense at the time?
Yeah. When I was hearing the reports, it was after that, we would still get sort of news reports and things like that. And I thought, what? It just, admittedly, the Khe Sanh was a bad experience, and the battle for Hue was a bad experience. But they never overran Saigon. They didn't even get to Da Nang. Dong Ha held out. So, they were not all that successful, and they paid a hell of a price for it.
Were you paying attention in April '75 when Saigon fell?
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
What was your reaction to that?
Oh, frustration, sadness. I just, I was really frustrated that we weren't bombing them around the clock, but we didn't do any of that, and to have the capability and not do something about that. It was really frustrating to me. And I was a camp pendleton at the time, and I think everybody that, in fact, I shared an office with a guy who had been heavily involved in Operation Phoenix, and he was very frustrated. So
You were still in the Marine Corps when.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
was part of that feeling of frustration, what caused that? Some veterans say they felt like, it was inevitable. South Vietnam was never going to stand on its own. And so it was sad, but it was inevitable. Others say, no, it wasn't inevitable. We left an ally in the lurch and we should have gone in to help our ally. Where do you stand on that? What was the cause of the frustration?
I would say it was the latter. That we. I'm not convinced that we couldn't have kept South Vietnam free. Would have maybe required a shift in strategy, and something at the very high level to make decisions that would allow that to happen. But I think it could have been done, but we chose not to. I think that. I mean, we cut off aid to the South Vietnamese. I mean, what that made the outcome inevitable, I believe, because they were still getting support from the Russians and the Red Chinese.
The North Vietnamese were.
Yeah. I mean, there's no tank factory in North Vietnam that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Those
So
are all.
your feeling is that the U.S. at that point kind of abandoned its South Vietnamese ally and just left it for the wolves.
Yeah. I mean, we did what we could to get people out of there, but and that was I think the least we could have done to get as many people out of there that may have been worried about what would happen to them if the North Vietnamese took over. I mean, the peasants in the rice fields, they had no worries, but people that had worked for us in South Vietnam certainly had a cause to worry, and their officers in the RVN and also had cause to worry. So I think we needed to do something to get as many of them out as we could, and we did try that. Most of the guys I went through basic school with were OCS, and I was the only Naval Academy graduate in my company because I had a knee operation and had to roll back, and so I got a company of OCS guys, and I never really knew much about OCS, but those guys were great, and I learned a lot from them. And one of the members of our basic school class was awarded a Medal of Honor.
What was his name?
John Bobo.